Hey, stop right there. Hands where I can see them. Now,
All right, we're stopped.
turn and face me. Keep those hands up.
You're looking at him, officer.
Dad?
It's all right, bud. Just stay behind me.
Rifle. Take it off your shoulder nice and slow and hand it over.
Okay, I'm gonna reach for the strap.
What happens when the men and women trained to defend their nation encounter the very authority meant to keep order on home soil? What unfolds when a routine traffic stop transforms into a constitutional crisis, or when a simple afternoon walk becomes a showdown over fundamental rights? These are not hypothetical questions. These are documented moments captured on body cameras and dash cams where American soldiers found themselves not on foreign battlefields, but in confrontations with local law enforcement officers. The stories you are about to witness will challenge everything you believe about the relationship between those who serve overseas and those who patrol our streets. They will make you question the training, the judgment, and sometimes the very humanity of the individuals entrusted with protecting civilian life. And perhaps most disturbingly, they will reveal a pattern that extends far beyond isolated incidents. If you appreciate thorough examinations of real events that shape our understanding of justice in America, consider staying with this channel. What we uncover in the next hour might fundamentally change how you view encounters between veterans and police officers. Let us begin with an incident that seems almost too absurd to be real, yet every moment was recorded by official equipment. The morning of June 15th, 2019, started like any other Saturday in Millbrook, Arkansas. The sun had barely cleared the tree line along Interstate 42, casting long shadows across the asphalt that still held the cool dampness of the previous night. Marcus Wheeler, a 47-year-old disabled veteran, was driving his silver Honda sedan eastbound, his wife Denise in the passenger seat beside him. They were heading home from an early breakfast, the kind of quiet ritual that helped Marcus manage the anxiety that had become his constant companion since returning from his second deployment to Afghanistan. Marcus kept his eyes on the road, maintaining a steady 55 miles per hour in the right lane. The interstate was nearly empty at this hour, just scattered trucks and the occasional family vehicle making early starts on weekend trips. Behind him, perhaps 3 car lengths back, a police cruiser followed at the same speed. Marcus noticed it in his rearview mirror, but thought nothing of it. He had done nothing wrong. His registration was current. His license was valid. He was simply driving home. What Marcus did not realize, could not have known, was that Officer Derek Simmons in that patrol car behind him was distracted. The 31-year-old patrolman had been on duty since 11 the previous night, and his attention had drifted to his mobile data terminal, where he was typing a response to a message from dispatch. His foot remained steady on the accelerator, but his eyes were not on the road. Marcus saw the exit for Millbrook approaching. Route 7, his turn off. He activated his turn signal, checked his mirrors, and began the gradual deceleration that any safe driver would execute. The shoulder widened here, creating a natural lane for vehicles preparing to exit. Marcus guided his sedan toward the right, his speed dropping appropriately as the exit ramp approached. Behind him, Officer Simmons finally looked up from his terminal. The distance between his cruiser and the silver Honda had closed dramatically. What had been 3 car lengths was now barely 1. Simmons reacted instinctively, his foot moving to the brake, but physics was already working against him. The front bumper of the patrol car connected with the rear of the Honda with a jarring crunch that seemed to echo across the empty morning highway. Both vehicles came to rest on the shoulder, the Honda several feet ahead, its rear bumper now bearing a fresh dent and scrape from the black and white cruiser behind it. Denise gasped from the passenger seat, her hand flying to the dashboard for support. Marcus felt the impact travel through the frame of his vehicle, felt the sudden spike of adrenaline that his body still could not distinguish from the hypervigilance that had kept him alive in combat zones. He sat for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, forcing himself to breathe. This was not Kandahar. This was Arkansas. He had just been rear-ended. That was all. He needed to stay calm, exchange information, and continue home. In the patrol car, Officer Simmons was experiencing a different kind of calculation. His mind raced through the implications of what had just occurred. He had struck a civilian vehicle. He had been looking at his computer. There would be questions. There would be reports. There could be consequences. But as he stepped out of his cruiser and approached the Honda, a different narrative began forming in his mind. A narrative that placed responsibility anywhere but on himself. Marcus opened his door and stepped out, his movements careful and deliberate. At 47, he still carried himself with the bearing of a soldier, despite the invisible wounds that had earned him his disability rating. 100% service-connected, the Veterans Administration had determined severe post-traumatic stress, chronic anxiety, and episodes that could be triggered without warning by sudden sounds, unexpected physical contact, or confrontational situations. Officer Simmons approached with his citation book already in hand. The body camera on his chest was recording, capturing everything that would follow. What that camera documented would eventually expose the staggering disconnect between what actually happened and what Simmons attempted to make happen. The officer did not ask if anyone was injured. He did not inquire about the well-being of the occupants. Instead, his first words set the tone for everything that followed. "You caused that by stopping on the highway." Marcus stood by his vehicle, processing what he had just heard. The words seemed to arrive from a great distance, filtered through the fog of disbelief. He had been rear-ended while preparing to exit. The damage to his vehicle proved the physics of the impact, and the officer who had struck him was claiming it was his fault. "I was taking my exit," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the internal storm building inside him. "You hit me from behind." Simmons shook his head, his expression hardening. "You were following too close, and then you stopped. That's improper lane usage." Denise had emerged from the passenger side now, her face pale with concern. She watched the exchange with growing alarm. She knew her husband better than anyone. She knew how hard he worked every day to manage his condition, knew the techniques he employed to remain grounded when situations threatened to overwhelm him. She could see the tension building in his shoulders, the way his hands had begun to tremble slightly at his sides. "Officer," she interjected, stepping closer, "there isn't even any real damage. Can we just exchange information and—" "Ma'am, I need you to step back," Simmons interrupted. "This is between me and the driver." Marcus looked at the minimal contact point between the vehicles. A scuff of paint transfer, a small dent, cosmetic damage that would barely register at a body shop. But that was not what concerned him. What concerned him was the growing realization that this officer intended to transform his own mistake into Marcus's liability. Marcus said, and now his voice carried the edge of frustration that he had been fighting to suppress. Quote, 9. Simmons took a step closer, his posture shifting into something more aggressive. Quote, 10. Those words, "calm down," acted like accelerant on the fire burning in Marcus's chest. His entire adult life had been spent in service to this country. 2 deployments, decorations he never discussed, friends buried in soil thousands of miles from home. And now this officer, barely old enough to have been in high school when Marcus first shipped out, was telling him to calm down after rear-ending him and attempting to assign blame. "I am calm," Marcus replied, though they both knew the statement was becoming less true by the second. "What I'm not going to do is accept responsibility for something you did." The exchange continued to deteriorate. Simmons began writing a citation explaining that Marcus was being charged with improper lane usage and following too closely. The absurdity of the second charge, given that Marcus was in front, seemed lost on the officer entirely. When Marcus pointed out this logical impossibility, Simmons simply repeated that Marcus needed to calm down or face additional consequences. It was at this moment that the situation crossed a threshold that would later become central to the formal complaint filed by the Wheeler family. Marcus, his voice rising despite every effort to control it, expressed his disbelief using language that was admittedly not suitable for polite company. A single profane word born of frustration and injustice escaped his lips. To Officer Simmons, this provided all the justification he needed. "That's it. Out of the car. You're under arrest." But Marcus was not in the car. He was standing beside it. The command made no sense in context, which only added to the surreal quality of what was happening. Nevertheless, Simmons approached with handcuffs drawn, his other hand resting on his service weapon. Denise stepped between them, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Please, please wait. He's a veteran. He has severe PTSD. He's 100% disabled. Please, just give him a moment to calm down." The body camera captured every word she spoke, every desperate plea for understanding. It recorded the fear in her voice and the tears beginning to form in her eyes. Her husband had survived combat, had survived the transition home when so many of his brothers did not, had survived the long nights and the medication adjustments and the therapy sessions. And now he was being arrested on the side of an Arkansas highway by the officer who had struck his vehicle. Simmons seemed momentarily uncertain. The mention of veteran status, of disability, of PTSD introduced variables he had not anticipated. But rather than de-escalating, rather than pausing to reassess the situation, he doubled down. "Ma'am, I don't care about his military service. He needs to learn to control himself. When he can act like a grown man, we can have a conversation." Those words would later be played in supervisory review sessions, in community meetings, and in the offices of the attorneys who took the Wheeler case. They would become emblematic of a fundamental failure to understand the very citizens officers are sworn to protect. Marcus was placed in handcuffs. He did not resist, though every fiber of his being screamed against the injustice. He had been trained to survive, to fight, to never surrender. But he had also been trained to recognize when resistance would only make things worse. He allowed himself to be led to the patrol car, his wife sobbing behind him, his morning in ruins. The arrest, however, would not last long. Within 20 minutes, a supervisor arrived on scene. Sergeant Marlene Torres had been monitoring radio traffic and had picked up on something unusual in the initial report. An officer claiming a rear-end collision was the fault of the vehicle in front. A veteran mentioned as being disorderly. Something did not add up. Sergeant Torres reviewed the body camera footage on her mobile device, right there on the shoulder of Interstate 42. She watched Simmons strike the Honda. She watched his immediate deflection of responsibility. She watched the escalation, the dismissal of the wife's desperate explanation, the arrest of a man whose only crime was expressing frustration at being blamed for someone else's mistake. When she approached Simmons, her expression told him everything he needed to know before she spoke a single word. "Release him. Now." "But Sergeant, I watched your camera. Release him. We'll discuss this at the station." Marcus Wheeler was uncuffed, his wrists bearing the red marks that would fade within hours, but that represented something far more permanent in his memory. He stood on the shoulder as the patrol cars departed, his wife's arms around him, the citations still technically issued, but destined to become central exhibits in the lawsuit that would follow. Let me pause here to invite your thoughts. What would you have done in Marcus's position? How would you have responded to being blamed for an accident that was clearly not your fault? Leave your perspective in the comments below, and if you are finding value in these documented accounts of injustice, consider subscribing for more in-depth examinations of cases like this one. The aftermath of the Millbrook incident unfolded over several months. The Wheeler family filed a civil complaint against Officer Simmons and the Millbrook Police Department, citing false arrest, emotional distress, and violation of civil rights. The lawsuit specifically referenced the officer's failure to acknowledge or accommodate Marcus's documented disability, as well as the fundamental dishonesty of attempting to blame a rear-end collision on the vehicle that was struck. Officer Simmons faced internal disciplinary proceedings. The exact outcome of those proceedings was never made fully public, though sources within the department indicated that he received a suspension and was required to complete additional training focused on interactions with individuals experiencing mental health crises. Whether such training addressed the core issue, his willingness to lie about the cause of an accident he himself caused, remained an open question. Marcus Wheeler, for his part, continued his daily struggle with the invisible wounds of his service. The incident on Interstate 42 became another entry in the catalog of moments that triggered his symptoms, another reminder that the country he had fought for did not always extend the courtesy of basic fairness to those who had sacrificed for it. But Marcus's story, as troubling as it was, represents just one pattern of interaction between veterans and law enforcement. Our next case takes us to a small city in Central Florida, where a confrontation on an ordinary afternoon revealed something even more disturbing about the exercise of police authority. The city of Palmdale, Florida, sits about 40 miles inland from the Atlantic coast, a place where retirement communities share space with working-class neighborhoods, and where the pace of life moves considerably slower than in the tourist-heavy regions to the south. On September 8, 2017, the afternoon temperature hovered around 89 degrees, the kind of humid heat that makes everything feel slightly more difficult than it should be. Raymond Foster was 69 years old that day, a veteran of the United States Army who had served during the Vietnam era. Nearly 5 decades had passed since his discharge, but the military had shaped the man he became, instilling habits of precision and directness that remained with him throughout his civilian career and into his retirement. Raymond was not the kind of person who sought confrontation. He was the kind of person who had learned to speak his mind clearly and expect the same from others. That afternoon, Raymond stood on the sidewalk outside a small shopping plaza on Morrison Avenue, engaged in what neighbors would later describe as a passionate but not threatening series of comments directed at passing traffic. The comments concerned a local political issue, a proposed development that Raymond believed would damage the character of his neighborhood. He was exercising his First Amendment rights in the most traditional way possible, standing in a public space and making his voice heard. 2 patrol officers received a call about a man yelling at cars. The caller had not reported any threats, any violence, or any specific concern beyond the volume of Raymond's advocacy. Officers Paulo Medina and Keith Patterson responded, their body cameras activating as they approached the 69-year-old veteran standing alone on the sidewalk. What happened next would cost one of those officers his job and become a case study in how not to engage with citizens exercising lawful rights. Officer Medina was 28 years old, a 3-year veteran of the Palmdale Police Department. He approached Raymond with the kind of aggressive posture that suggested he had already decided how this encounter would proceed. His partner, Officer Patterson, hung back slightly, his own body language more neutral, but his presence reinforcing the power dynamic of 2 armed officers confronting a single elderly man. "Sir, we got a call about someone yelling at traffic. That you?" Raymond turned to face the officers, his expression more curious than concerned. "I was expressing my opinion about the development project. Is that against the law now?" A reasonable response, a legitimate question. In a functioning interaction between police and citizen, it would have prompted a brief explanation, perhaps a request to keep the volume down, and a departure by all parties to continue their respective days. But Officer Medina had a different approach in mind. "What's your name? I need to see some ID." Raymond's brow furrowed. These were textbook questions, the kind that citizens are often advised to ask when confronted by law enforcement. They are not signs of guilt or resistance. They are attempts to understand the legal basis for an officer's actions. But to Officer Medina, they appeared to represent something else entirely, a challenge to his authority. "Listen," Medina said, stepping closer until he was well within Raymond's personal space. Raymond did not step back, though every instinct told him he should create distance. He was 69 years old. He had grandchildren. He had served his country and spent his working life as a contributing member of society. He was not going to be intimidated on a public sidewalk for speaking his mind. Quote 25. Raymond replied, Quote 26. What happened next was captured in its entirety by Medina's body camera. The officer reached out and grabbed Raymond's arm, beginning to spin him around toward the wall of the shopping plaza. The movement was sudden, forceful, and entirely disproportionate to anything Raymond had said or done. Quote 27. The words were shouted for the benefit of the camera, though Raymond had done nothing but stand his ground. His arm was wrenched behind his back. His face was pushed against the rough stucco of the building. He was 69 years old, a veteran, and he was being treated like a violent criminal for asking why he was being detained. Quota Secreset 28. Raymond managed to say, his voice strained from the pressure on his body. Quote 29. Officer Patterson moved closer now, though his role seemed less certain. He did not physically assist in the restraint, but neither did he intervene to de-escalate. His body camera captured a different angle of the same events, showing Medina's aggressive handling of a senior citizen who had done nothing more than exercise his constitutional rights. The arrest proceeded. Raymond was charged with resisting an officer without violence, a charge that would later be described by the Palmdale police chief as lacking any probable cause whatsoever. He was transported to the county detention facility, processed, and held until he could post bail. A 69-year-old veteran spent the night in a cell because he asked a police officer to explain the legal basis for demanding identification. The body camera footage remained within department files for nearly 14 months. It was only when Raymond's attorney filed a formal discovery request as part of a civil complaint that the video became available to parties outside the department. When it was finally reviewed by supervisory personnel and legal counsel, the reaction was swift and damning. Quote 31. Those words came from Police Chief Dorothy Hammond during the press conference that announced Officer Medina's termination. Chief Hammond went further, confirming that Medina had completed extensive de-escalation training, the very training that was supposed to prevent exactly this kind of incident. He knew better, she said. He chose not to apply what he knew. That choice has consequences. Officer Medina was terminated from the Palmdale Police Department. Raymond Foster served his 2 days before the charges were dismissed, days that no one could give back to him, hours spent in a concrete room because an officer could not tolerate being questioned. During the press conference, Chief Hammond addressed a comment that Medina had made during the arrest, words captured clearly on his body camera. At one point, while Raymond was restrained against the wall, Medina had leaned close and spoken directly into the older man's ear. Quote, 34. Chief Hammond played that clip for the assembled reporters. The room fell silent. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of institutional embarrassment. Raymond Foster never fully recovered from the experience, not because of any physical injury, though his shoulder bothered him for months afterward from the rough handling, but because something fundamental had broken in his understanding of the relationship between citizens and those sworn to protect them. He had spent his life believing in that social contract, believing that if you followed the law and contributed to your community, you would be treated with basic respect. One afternoon on Morrison Avenue taught him otherwise. If this case disturbs you, if it makes you question what other incidents might be buried in department files waiting to be discovered, you are not alone. These stories matter because they reveal patterns that might otherwise remain hidden. Consider subscribing to stay informed about cases that challenge our assumptions about justice and accountability. Our third documented incident takes us north to the textile mill towns of the Carolina Piedmont, where a disabled veteran found himself in a confrontation that would shock even seasoned observers of police conduct. This is the story of Tyler Sullivan, a soldier who came home from war only to have his service dog attacked by the very officers who should have recognized him as one of their own. Ashford, North Carolina, occupies that particular space in American geography where the Old South meets the New. Former mill buildings have been converted to loft apartments. Chain restaurants share parking lots with family-owned barbecue joints that have stood for generations. It is a place where people largely mind their own business, where the pace of life allows for neighborliness, and where the sight of someone standing at an intersection asking for help is not uncommon. October 18th, 2021 was a Wednesday, and the weather had finally broken from the brutal summer heat into something resembling autumn. Tyler Sullivan stood at the corner of Chestnut Avenue and Industrial Boulevard, a spot where traffic slowed for the light and where people sometimes stopped to offer a few dollars to those in need. Tyler was 34 years old, a veteran of the Army National Guard who had deployed to Iraq in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. He had returned with both visible and invisible wounds, the combination earning him a disability rating that made traditional employment difficult. Standing beside Tyler, as she always did, was his service dog Bella, a golden retriever trained to detect the onset of Tyler's anxiety attacks and to provide the grounding presence that helped him navigate a world that often felt overwhelming. Bella wore a service vest clearly identifying her role. She was not merely a pet. She was, in the language of federal law, a medical device, an extension of Tyler himself that allowed him to function in public spaces. Tyler was not panhandling. He would later insist on this point repeatedly, and witnesses would confirm his account. He was standing at the intersection with a sign that read, "Veteran needs help," while selling small items, keychains, and prayer cards for $1 each. The distinction might seem minor, but in Ashford, as in many cities, it represented the difference between legal activity and a municipal code violation. Officers Nathan Carter and Michelle Brooks of the Ashford Police Department received a call about a man soliciting at the intersection. The caller described him as persistent, possibly aggressive. That description would prove to be significantly exaggerated, but it shaped how the officers approached the situation. Their first contact came just after 2 in the afternoon. Tyler saw the patrol car pull into the nearby gas station parking lot, watched the two officers emerge, and begin walking toward him. He felt his heart rate increase, felt Bella press against his leg in response to the stress she detected. He forced himself to breathe, to remember his therapist's instructions about staying grounded during triggering situations. Quote 37. Tyler said as they approached, trying to project calmness he did not feel. Officer Carter, a 12-year veteran of the department, took the lead. Quote 38. Tyler nodded slowly. Quote 39. He reached slowly toward his pocket, announcing his movement before making it. Quote 40. What happened next was recorded by the body cameras both officers wore. Carter watched Tyler retrieve a folded paper from his jacket pocket, a permit issued by the city clerk's office that authorized small-scale street vending. Carter examined it, his expression unreadable. This says you can sell on designated sidewalks. This intersection isn't designated. Tyler's face fell. He had been at this corner for weeks without incident. He had believed he was in compliance. It was a reasonable response, a compliant response. In most encounters, it would have ended the interaction, but Officer Carter seemed unsatisfied. He handed the permit back, but did not step away. Quote 43. Tyler provided his driver's license. Carter examined it, then looked at Tyler with what several later observers would describe as contempt. Sullivan, you a veteran? Yes, sir. Army National Guard. I served in Iraq. Carter's expression did not soften. Quote 46. The words hit Tyler like a physical blow. He had spent years struggling with shame, with the feeling that he had somehow failed by coming home broken instead of whole. He had worked through those feelings in countless therapy sessions, had learned to recognize them as symptoms rather than truths. And now this officer, this fellow servant of the public, was wielding that shame like a weapon. Quote 47. Tyler managed. Quote 48. Quote 49. Carter handed back the license. Quote 50. Tyler moved. He gathered his few possessions, attached Bella's leash, and walked the 6 blocks to another intersection that he believed fell within the designated areas. He set up his small display again, trying to steady his hands, trying to quiet the voice in his head that echoed Officer Carter's words. He should have known the day was not over. Less than 3 hours later, the same patrol car appeared at Tyler's new location. Officers Carter and Brooks emerged again, but this time their body language was different. This time, they were not there to issue a warning. Sullivan, I told you to leave. You're still at it. Tyler looked around, confused. I moved. This is a different corner. This one should be designated. I told you to stop. I didn't say move to a new spot. You're under arrest for failure to comply with a lawful order. What followed was captured in footage that would later be viewed by prosecutors, by defense attorneys, by journalists, and by hundreds of thousands of people online. Tyler Sullivan was thrown to the ground by Officer Carter. He cried out that he was not resisting, that he would comply, that they were making a mistake. His words had no effect on the officer's actions. And then Bella reacted. The golden retriever, trained to protect her handler, trained to intervene when he was in distress, positioned herself between Tyler and the officers. She did not bite. She did not bark aggressively. She simply placed her body where her training told her it needed to be. Officer Brooks drew her taser. Quote 54. Tyler screamed. Quote 55. The taser discharged. Bella collapsed with a yelp that would haunt Tyler's nightmares for years afterward. The dog's body convulsed as the electrical current passed through her, and Tyler, pinned to the ground, could only watch. The arrest was completed. Tyler was transported to the county detention facility, charged with resisting arrest and failure to comply with a lawful order. Bella was taken to the municipal animal shelter, where she would remain for 48 hours until Tyler's family could retrieve her. When the body camera footage became public, the community reaction was explosive. The image of a tased service dog, of a disabled veteran being arrested for trying to earn a few dollars, of the contemptuous words Officer Carter had spoken, all of it combined to create a firestorm of criticism directed at the Ashford Police Department. The district attorney reviewed the footage and declined to file any charges against the officers, citing the legal complexity of distinguishing between lawful and unlawful orders during active enforcement situations. The decision was controversial, but not unprecedented. Prosecutors often face pressure to maintain working relationships with police departments, and that pressure can influence charging decisions in borderline cases. Officer Brooks received a 3-day suspension without pay for the tasing of Bella. The department acknowledged that the use of an electronic weapon against a clearly marked service animal was inappropriate, though they stopped short of calling it unlawful. Officer Carter resigned from the Ashford Police Department 2 weeks after the footage became public. His resignation letter cited personal reasons and expressed no remorse for his conduct. Sources within the department indicated that he had been facing potential termination for the manner in which he spoke to Tyler, if not for the arrest itself. The charges against Tyler Sullivan were eventually dismissed. The panhandling violation, to the extent one existed, was deemed too minor to pursue. The resisting arrest charge fell apart when attorneys demonstrated that Tyler had, in fact, complied with every direct instruction except the instruction to stop existing in public spaces while poor. But the story does not end there. The final chapter of Tyler Sullivan's encounter with the Ashford Police Department would not be written for another 8 months. Bella, the golden retriever who had served as Tyler's lifeline to the world, never fully recovered from the tasing incident. Veterinarians diagnosed lasting nerve damage that affected her gait and her ability to perform the alerting behaviors that had made her such an effective service animal. Tyler worked with her daily, trying to help her heal, trying to restore the bond that had been damaged when she watched him dragged to the ground and could not stop it. On June 23, 2022, Bella slipped her leash during a walk near Tyler's apartment. She had never done this before, not once in the 4 years she had been his companion. But her reactions were slower now. Her awareness diminished. She ran into the street. The driver of the sedan never saw her until it was too late. Tyler buried his service dog 3 days later. The veterans support group that had helped him through his transition home conducted the ceremony. Men and women who had served alongside him who understood what Bella meant in ways that civilians could not fully grasp stood with him as he said goodbye. When asked by a local journalist whether he blamed the Ashford Police Department for Bella's death, Tyler's response was measured but devastating. "That dog saved my life more times than I can count. She was the reason I could leave my apartment, the reason I could try to be part of the world again. What those officers did that day, they broke something in her. Maybe it was the taser. Maybe it was watching me get arrested when she couldn't protect me. I don't know. But she wasn't the same after, and now she's gone." This case raises questions that extend far beyond a single confrontation on a Carolina street corner. How do we train officers to recognize and respect the unique needs of veterans? How do we ensure that service animals, which are legally protected medical equipment, are not treated as threats simply because they respond to their handler's distress? And what accountability exists when the consequences of an officer's actions extend months or years beyond the initial encounter? I want to hear your thoughts. Has watching these cases changed how you view the relationship between law enforcement and veterans? Share your perspective in the comments. And if you believe these stories deserve wider attention, please consider sharing this video with others who care about accountability and justice. Our final case takes us to the heart of Texas, to a confrontation that would become a national flashpoint in the debate over constitutional rights, police discretion, and the authority of officers to disarm citizens engaged in lawful activity. The spring of 2013 had been mild in Belmont, Texas, a small city in the central part of the state where ranching traditions mixed with the suburban sprawl spreading outward from larger population centers. On March 22nd of that year, Master Sergeant David Hollister decided to take his 13-year-old son Marcus on a nature hike along a rural road outside the city limits. David Hollister was not a controversial figure. He was, by all accounts, a dedicated soldier and father who had served multiple combat deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. He held the rank of Master Sergeant in the United States Army, a position that reflected nearly 2 decades of service and the trust of his commanding officers. On weekends, when he was not deployed or on duty, he prioritized time with his son, teaching him outdoor skills, self-reliance, and an appreciation for the Texas landscape. On this particular Saturday, David carried a rifle slung across his back. This was not unusual in rural Texas, where wildlife encounters were common and where the legal tradition of open carry stretched back to the state's founding. Texas law explicitly permitted the open carry of long guns, rifles, and shotguns without any special permit or license. The only restriction was that such carry could not be done in a manner, quote, 58, quote, a phrase that had been interpreted by courts as requiring specific intent to frighten or threaten. Father and son walked along Farm Road 2117, a quiet stretch of two-lane blacktop that saw more cattle trailers than passenger vehicles. David pointed out animal tracks in the soft earth beside the road, explained the different types of native plants, and enjoyed the simple pleasure of time with his child. They had been walking for perhaps 40 minutes when a pickup truck slowed as it passed them. David noticed the driver staring, but thought nothing of it. People often look twice at someone carrying a rifle, even in Texas. It was curiosity, not concern. What David did not know was that the driver had immediately called 911 to report, quote, 59 walking along the road. The description was inaccurate, as the rifle was a standard hunting model, rather than anything that could reasonably be termed an assault weapon. But the language of the report would shape how the responding officers approached the situation. Deputy Steve Holloway and Sergeant Kenneth Marks of the Bell County Sheriff's Department responded to the call. Their patrol vehicles approached from opposite directions, effectively boxing in David and Marcus on the narrow road. As the officers emerged from their vehicles, their hands moved to their service weapons. David stopped walking. He placed a gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder, guiding his son slightly behind him. He understood immediately that this was going to be a tense situation, and his priority was protecting his child from whatever might unfold. Quote 60. David called out, keeping his hands visible and away from the rifle. Quote 61. Deputy Holloway was already advancing, his hand firmly on his holstered pistol. Quote 62. David's mind raced through his knowledge of Texas law. He was doing nothing illegal. He was on a public road. The rifle was not pointed at anyone. He had every right to be where he was, carrying what he was carrying. Deputy, I'm happy to cooperate, but I need to understand what I'm being accused of. I'm exercising my legal right to carry a long gun in the state of Texas. The statement was factually correct, legally sound, and completely ineffective at de-escalating the situation. Deputy Holloway's response was to draw his weapon and point it at David's chest. I said, put it down, now. Marcus let out a small sound of fear, pressing closer to his father's back. The boy was 13 years old enough to understand that a police officer was pointing a gun at his dad, young enough to be terrified by what that meant. Quote 65. David said, his voice remarkably steady given the circumstances. Quote 66. Sergeant Marks had positioned himself to David's flank, his own weapon drawn. The body cameras both officers wore documented what happened next in sharp detail. Deputy Holloway advanced rapidly, grabbing the rifle's strap and yanking it from David's shoulder with enough force to spin him partially around. The officer then seized David's arm and slammed him against the hood of the nearest patrol car. Marcus cried out. David managed. Aside quote 69. But everything was not okay. David was being handcuffed by officers who had yet to articulate any legal basis for their actions. His rifle was being taken. His son was watching his father treated like a criminal for doing nothing more than going for a walk. David demanded. Quote 71. Deputy Holloway's response would become central to the legal battle that followed. You're under arrest. You can find out the charges later. The statement was captured clearly on body camera audio. An American citizen, a serving member of the United States military, was being arrested without being informed of the offense. His property was being seized. His son was watching. Sergeant Marks took Marcus aside, speaking to him in tones too quiet for the body cameras to capture clearly. The boy was crying, his understanding of the world fundamentally altered by what he was witnessing. His father, his hero, the soldier who had survived combat zones in 2 countries, was in handcuffs on the side of a Texas road. David was transported to the Bell County Detention Facility and charged with interfering with a peace officer and rudely displaying a weapon. The first charge related to his questions about the legal basis for the stop. The second relied on a Texas statute that prohibited displaying a firearm in a manner calculated to cause alarm. The case went to trial, and the legal arguments illuminated the fundamental tension between individual rights and police authority. David's attorneys argued that he had done nothing illegal, that open carry was his constitutional and statutory right, and that asking officers to explain their actions did not constitute interference. The prosecution countered that officers have discretion to temporarily disarm individuals during investigative stops, and that David's refusal to immediately comply created the basis for the charges. On March 30th, 2017, nearly 4 years after the incident, the court issued its ruling. The judge found that the officers had acted within their authority, that the arrest was technically legal, and that officers were not required to specify the exact law being broken at the moment of arrest. David Hollister was convicted. The sentence was minimal, probation, and a small fine, but the conviction itself represented something far larger. An American soldier had been arrested for lawfully carrying a firearm, and the courts had upheld that arrest. The ruling sparked outrage among Second Amendment advocates, veterans groups, and civil liberties organizations. Commentators pointed out the troubling implications. If officers could arrest citizens for lawful conduct simply by feeling Narrator quote 74, and if they were not required to specify what law was being broken, then the concept of lawful conduct itself became meaningless. David Hollister became an advocate for open carry rights and police accountability reform. He testified before state legislative committees, spoke at rallies, and worked with other veterans to raise awareness about the treatment of service members by law enforcement. His son Marcus, now a young adult, has spoken publicly about how the incident shaped his understanding of authority and justice. The Bell County Sheriff's Department did not discipline either officer involved in the stop. Department officials stated that both officers acted within policy and that the court's ruling validated their conduct. But validation in court does not equate to validation in the broader sense. The footage of that day, of a soldier being disarmed on a Texas road while his teenage son watched in tears, continues to circulate online. It has been viewed millions of times, shared by people across the political spectrum who find common ground in their discomfort with what it represents. We have now examined 4 documented incidents spanning nearly a decade, from Arkansas to Florida to North Carolina to Texas. 4 veterans, 4 confrontations with law enforcement, 4 cases where the men who had served their country found themselves treated not as heroes, but as threats. What patterns emerge from these stories? The veterans involved range in age from 34 to 69. They include a Gulf War-era soldier, a Vietnam-era serviceman, a National Guard member who deployed to Iraq, and an active-duty master sergeant with combat experience in 2 theaters. Their encounters took place in different states, involved different departments, and arose from different circumstances. Yet certain elements repeat with troubling consistency. Officers who escalate rather than de-escalate, commands given without legal justification, arrests made when questions are asked, force used against individuals who pose no actual threat, and underlying it all, a fundamental failure to recognize that the person on the other side of the encounter has also worn a uniform in service to the nation. This is not an indictment of all law enforcement. The majority of officers serve with honor, make difficult decisions under pressure, and never appear in videos like the ones we have discussed. But the existence of good officers does not excuse the conduct of those who abuse their authority, particularly when their victims include the men and women who have already sacrificed so much. What does it mean when a soldier can survive multiple deployments to combat zones only to be assaulted on a domestic sidewalk? What does it tell us when a veteran service dog is tased, when a master sergeant is arrested in front of his child, when a 69-year-old who served his country is thrown against a wall for asking why? These are not comfortable questions. They do not have easy answers, but they are questions we must ask if we are serious about honoring those who serve and reforming the institutions that sometimes fail them. As we close, I want to leave you with a reflection. Every one of the veterans in these stories took an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. They kept that oath, often at great personal cost. And then they encountered officers who seemed to view them not as fellow servants of the public good, but as problems to be solved through force. The body camera footage exists. The court records are public. The consequences, from firings to resignations to dismissals to convictions, are documented. What remains to be determined is whether these cases represent isolated failures or symptoms of something more systemic. That determination belongs to all of us, as citizens, as voters, as members of communities where veterans live and where police officers serve. It belongs to you. What do you think? Have these stories changed how you view the challenges veterans face when they return home? Do you believe the officers involved faced appropriate consequences, or should accountability look different? I genuinely want to know your perspective, so please share it in the comments below. And if you believe that stories like these deserve to be told, if you think there is value in examining documented incidents that reveal uncomfortable truths about power and justice in America, then I hope you will subscribe to this channel. More cases like these exist. More footage waits to be examined. More questions demand answers. Until next time, remember that the uniforms we honor are not just those worn by police officers. They are also worn by the men and women who stand on distant walls so that we can sleep safely in our beds. And when those veterans come home, they deserve to find a nation that treats them with the dignity their service has earned. They served their country. They should not have to fight it.